The bitter wind howled through the gaps in the wooden walls, carrying with it the promise of another harsh winter in the mountain town of Silver Creek. Lila May pressed a damp cloth to her mother's burning forehead, trying not to let the fear show in her eyes. The small cabin, which had been their home since Papa died in the mine collapse 3 years ago, seemed to grow colder with each passing hour. "Mama, please," she whispered, adjusting the thin blanket that barely covered her mother's frail form. "You need to fight this. You need to stay with me." Sarah Cullen's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. Her once strong hands, weathered from years of taking in washing to keep food on the table, now lay limp against the rough sheets. The consumption had taken hold 6 months ago, and despite Lila's prayers and endless care, it only grew worse. The door burst open, letting in a swirl of snow and the imposing figure of Dr. Nathaniel Hartley. He stomped his boots on the threshold, his medical bag clutched in one gloved hand. Lila rose quickly, hope and dread warring in her chest. "Dr. Hartley, thank God you've come. She's been worse since yesterday." "Miss Collins," the doctor interrupted, his voice clipped and businesslike. He moved to examine Sarah, his movements efficient but lacking warmth. After several minutes of checking her pulse and listening to her labored breathing, he straightened with a grim expression. "The new medicine from back east, the one I told you about last week. It's her only chance now." He began packing his instruments. $300. Cash. I can have it here within the week if you can pay." Lila felt the room spin. $300 might as well have been 3,000. "Doctor, please. We don't have that kind of money. Surely there must be some arrangement we can—" "I'm not running a charity. Miss Collins, I've already extended more credit than I should have." He picked up his bag and moved toward the door. "You have 3 days. After that—" He shrugged, the gesture more eloquent than any words. After he left, Lila sank into the rickety chair beside her mother's bed. $300. She mentally cataloged their meager possessions. Papa's old rifle, worth maybe $20. Mama's wedding ring, no, she couldn't sell that. The few chickens out back might bring $5 at most. Even if she sold everything they owned, including the cabin itself, it wouldn't come close. She thought of her brother Thomas, who'd left for California 2 years ago, promising to send money. Not a word since. She was alone in this, as she'd been alone in everything since Papa died. The next morning, Lila made her way through the muddy streets of Silver Creek, stopping at every establishment that might offer work. The general store, the boarding house, even the church, all turned her away. She already took in what washing she could, but with winter setting in, even that work had dried up. As evening fell, she found herself standing outside the Golden Horseshoe Saloon, the raucous laughter and piano music spilling into the street. She'd walked past this place 1,000 times, always averting her eyes from the painted women who lounged on the balcony. Good women didn't go into saloons. Good women didn't even think about, but good women didn't let their mothers die either. With trembling hands, she pushed through the swinging doors. The noise hit her like a physical blow, shouting, laughing, the clink of glasses and the slap of cards on tables. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of whiskey. Every head turned to look at her, conversation stuttering to a halt. Jake Morrison, the saloon owner, stood behind the bar polishing a glass. His eyes narrowed as he took in her plain brown dress and nervous demeanor. "You lost, little lady. Church is 2 blocks down. Lila's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and forced herself to meet his gaze. "I need to speak with you, privately." Morrison's eyebrows rose. He jerked his head toward a door at the back. "My office." The office was small and cluttered, dominated by a scarred wooden desk covered in papers. Morrison settled his bulk into a chair that groaned under his weight and gestured for her to sit. Lila remained standing, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mr. Morrison, I need—" The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. "I need $300 for my mother's medicine. She's dying. And what's that got to do with me? I ain't no bank. Lila forced herself to continue, each word feeling like it was being torn from her soul. I've heard that sometimes. That is, I know that some women, for the right price. Morrison's laugh was harsh and ugly. You, Miss High and Mighty Lila Collins, you're saying you want to work upstairs? Just once, she said quickly, her face burning with shame. Just one night for $300. $300? Morrison laughed again. Girl, you got no idea what you're talking about. The girls upstairs are lucky to clear $20 on a good night. And that's the experienced ones. Please, the word came out as a sob. There must be someone who would pay. Morrison studied her for a long moment, something calculating in his eyes. You know what you're asking? You know what it means? Lila nodded, though in truth she only had the vaguest notion, gleaned from overheard whispers and her mother's careful warnings about men. Wait here, Morrison said finally. He left the office, and Lila heard him speaking to someone in low tones. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. There's a man, been drinking alone in the corner all night. Big fellow, keeps to himself. When I mentioned your situation, he said he'd pay full $300, cash on the barrel. Lila's knees nearly buckled with relief and terror. Who is he? Don't know. Came down from the mountains yesterday. Goes by Colt. That's all I got. Morrison counted out bills from a strong box. Here's your money. Room's upstairs. Last door on the right. He'll be up directly. With numb fingers, Lila took the money. It felt heavier than it should, as if each bill carried the weight of what she was about to do. She climbed the narrow stairs, her feet feeling like lead. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with closed doors behind which she could hear muffled voices and other sounds she tried not to identify. The last door on the right stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open to find a small room dominated by a brass bed. A fire crackled in the tiny fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lila moved to the window, staring out at the street below where good, respectable people went about their lives. The door opened behind her. She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man who entered had to duck his head to clear the doorframe. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the rough clothing of a mountain man, heavy coat, worn boots, canvas pants. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. He closed the door quietly and stood there, seeming to fill the small room with his presence. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then he crossed to the chair by the fireplace and sat down heavily, removing his hat to reveal dark hair shot through with premature gray. His face was weathered, marked by sun and wind, with lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as a winter sky and filled with something she couldn't name. You can sit, he said, his voice low and rough, or stand, whatever makes you comfortable. Comfortable. Lila almost laughed at the absurdity. Instead, she perched on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. That is, do you want me to— What's your name? He interrupted. Lila May Collins. And why are you here? Lila May Collins. The question surprised her. You know why, Mr. Morrison told you. I want to hear it from you. So she told him, the words pouring out in a rush, her mother's illness, the medicine, the desperate lack of options. He listened without interrupting, his gray eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke. You ever done this before? She shook her head, unable to voice the word no. He sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. Neither have I. Not like this. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the same street she'd been watching. My wife died 2 years ago. Fever took her and our daughter in the same week. Since then, He trailed off, then seemed to gather himself. Sometimes a man gets so lost in the dark, he forgets what the light looks like. Thought maybe being near someone might help me remember. Lila didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. He turned from the window. "I'm not going to touch you, Lila May. You can sleep in the bed. I'll take the chair. Come morning. You can go home to your mother with your money and your virtue intact. But won't you want... you paid... I paid for a night of your company. Nothing more." He settled back into the chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "Sleep. You look dead on your feet." Lila stared at him, unable to process this turn of events. "I don't understand. Maybe I don't either," he admitted. "But I know I won't add to whatever burden you're already carrying. Now sleep." Too exhausted and emotionally drained to argue, Lila lay down on top of the covers, still fully dressed. She watched him through half-closed eyes as he sat by the fire, his profile etched in gold by the flames. Occasionally, he would shift or add another log, but otherwise, he was still as stone, despite everything. Despite the strangeness and shame of the situation, Lila found herself drifting towards sleep. The fire was warm, the bed softer than her straw mattress at home, and there was something oddly comforting about the silent presence of the man in the chair. Just before sleep claimed her, she heard him speak, so softly she might have imagined it. "Rest easy, little one. No harm will come to you tonight." When she woke, gray dawn light filtered through the window. The chair by the fire was empty, the man gone as if he'd never been there at all. On the small table beside the bed lay an additional $50 and a note written in a careful hand. "For anything else your mother might need. C." Lila clutched the money and the note to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know who the mountain man was or why he'd shown her such unexpected kindness. She only knew that in her darkest hour, when she'd been prepared to sacrifice everything, a stranger had given her the one thing she'd never expected to find in a place like the Golden Horseshoe Saloon: mercy. The medicine arrived from Denver 3 days later, packed carefully in a wooden crate marked with Dr. Hartley's name. Lila held her breath as he administered the first dose to her mother, watching the precious liquid disappear drop by drop. Within a week, the fever began to break. Sarah's breathing, while still labored, no longer carried the rattling sound that had haunted Lila's nightmares. "It's working, Doctor," Hartley admitted during one of his visits, genuine surprise coloring his usually dismissive tone. "Keep giving her the doses exactly as I prescribed. With luck and God's grace, she might pull through." But if God's grace was present in the Collins household, it seemed absent from the rest of Silver Creek. The news of Lila's night at the Golden Horseshoe spread through the small town like wildfire in dry grass. She first noticed it at Murphy's General Store, where Mrs. Murphy had always greeted her with a smile and often slipped an extra apple or two into her purchases. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Murphy said, not meeting Lila's eyes, "but I can't have you in my store. It's not proper. You understand?" Lila stood frozen, her basket of eggs, meant to trade for flour, growing heavy in her arms. "Mrs. Murphy, please. I only did what I had to do to save my mother." "What you did," Mrs. Murphy interrupted, her voice sharp, "was turn yourself into a fallen woman. No decent establishment can afford to be associated with that kind of behavior." She turned her back, busying herself with arranging canned goods. "Please leave." It was the same at the butcher's, the bakery, even the church where Lila had worshipped every Sunday since she could walk. Reverend Patterson took her aside after she'd sat through a sermon about the wages of sin, every word feeling like a stone thrown directly at her. "Miss Collins," he said, his face a mask of righteous disappointment, "while we believe in forgiveness, we must also consider the moral well-being of our congregation. Perhaps it would be best if you sought spiritual guidance elsewhere." "Where else is there?" Lila asked, fighting back tears. "This is the only church in Silver Creek." The Reverend's silence was answer enough. The whispers followed her everywhere. Groups of women would fall silent when she passed, then burst into hushed conversation the moment they thought she was out of earshot. Men who had once tipped their hats now looked at her with expressions that made her skin crawl. Some with disgust, others with a knowing leer that suggested they thought she might be available for the right price. Even the children had heard. Little Annie Watson, whom Lila had taught to sew just last summer, crossed the street rather than walk past her. Her mother's firm grip on her hand and the way she shielded the child's eyes spoke volumes. But the worst was yet to come. Lila had tried to shield her mother from the truth, claiming the medicine money had come from selling Papa's tools to a traveling merchant. But Silver Creek was too small for secrets, and one of the church ladies, Mrs. Abigail Henderson, who prided herself on Christian honesty, took it upon herself to inform Sarah Collins of her daughter's shameful degradation. Lila returned from attempting to find work at the edge of town to find her mother sitting up in bed, her face flushed not with fever but with rage. "How could you?" Sarah's voice, though weak, carried all the force of a winter storm. "How could you sell yourself like some saloon trollop? Mama, please, you were dying. I had no choice. There's always a choice." Sarah's thin hand slammed against the bedside table, making the medicine bottle jump. "Death with dignity is better than life with shame. You've ruined us. Lila May. Ruined everything your father and I worked for. I saved your life," Lila whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You should have let me die." The words hit Lila like physical blows. "I can't bear to look at you. Get out! Get out!" Lila stumbled from the cabin, her mother's sobs following her into the gathering dusk. She wandered the streets aimlessly, not knowing where to go. The boarding house wouldn't take her. Mrs. Garrett had made that clear when she'd tried to inquire about work there. The few friends she'd thought she had now pretended not to see her. Night fell, bringing with it a bitter wind that cut through her thin shawl. She finally took shelter in the old storage shed behind the abandoned church, the original building that had been replaced 5 years ago. It smelled of moldy hay and mouse droppings, but at least it blocked the wind. She'd barely settled into a corner, trying to arrange the old feed sacks into something resembling a bed, when she heard voices outside. Male voices, slurred with drink. "I saw her come this way," one said. "That Collins girl, the one who's selling it now. Bet she's cheaper than the regular whores." Another laughed. "Probably desperate enough to take whatever we offer." The door creaked open. 3 men stumbled in, backlit by the moon. Lila recognized them. Jack Turner, Will Brennan, and Pete Morrison, the saloon owner's nephew. Young men who spent their days at the mine and their nights drinking away their wages. Well, Jack said, spotting her huddled in the corner. "What have we here, little Lila May, all alone?" "Please," Lila said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just leave me be." "Leave you be?" Pete laughed, an ugly sound. "That's not what you said at my uncle's place, is it? How much for a turn, sweetheart?" They advanced on her, and Lila pressed herself against the wall, looking desperately for another way out. There wasn't one. Jack reached for her, his hands rough and grasping. The door exploded inward with such force it nearly came off its hinges. A figure filled the doorway, tall and broad and radiating menace. Even in the dim light, Lila recognized him, the mountain man from that night, Colt. "Step away from her." His voice was quiet, but it carried the promise of violence. Jack, drunk on whiskey and his own perceived power, made the mistake of laughing. "Or what, old man? There's 3 of us and 1 of you." Colt moved faster than a man his size should be able to. His fist connected with Jack's jaw with a sound like a hammer hitting meat. Jack went down hard and didn't get up. Will and Pete, suddenly sober, backed toward the door. "We didn't mean nothing," Will stammered. "Just having a bit of fun." "Get out." Colt didn't raise his voice, didn't need to, and spread the word. "Anyone who touches her answers to me." They fled, dragging the unconscious Jack between them. Colt stood there a moment, his broad back to Lila, shoulders tense as if he was fighting for control. Then he turned, and his gray eyes were gentle as they found hers in the darkness. "You hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He looked around the shed, taking in the squalid conditions, and something dark crossed his face. "This where you're sleeping?" My mother. She found out. I have nowhere else." He was quiet for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Come on." "Where? Does it matter?" She looked at his outstretched hand, work-worn and steady. Then at the shed that smelled of decay and desperation. Taking a breath, she placed her hand in his. He led her to where his horse waited, a big roan that stood patient in the moonlight. Without asking, he lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and she found herself enclosed in warmth and the scent of leather and pine. They rode through the sleeping town, past the houses where decent people lay in their warm beds, past the saloon where this had all started, past the church that no longer welcomed her. At the edge of town, where the road began its winding climb into the mountains, he paused. "Last chance," he said quietly. "You can go back. Try to make amends. Build a life here." Lila thought of her mother's words, of the closed doors and turned backs, of the men who thought her fair game now. "There's nothing for me here anymore." He made a sound that might have been approval and urged the horse forward, up into the darkness of the mountain road. Behind them, Silver Creek slept on, secure in its righteousness. But somewhere in the old storage shed, blood soaked into the dirt floor from Jack Turner's broken nose, and in a cabin on Mill Street, Sarah Collins clutched the medicine that had saved her life and wondered if the price had been too high. The horse climbed steadily upward, carrying two broken souls away from the judgment of civilization and into the untamed wilderness, where perhaps different rules applied, where perhaps a fallen woman and a grieving widower might find something neither had thought to look for: a second chance. As the lights of Silver Creek disappeared below them, Lila allowed herself to lean back slightly against the solid warmth of the man behind her. She didn't know where he was taking her or what awaited them in the mountains. She only knew that for the first time since that night at the Golden Horseshoe. She felt safe, and in that moment, safety was enough. The mountain road wound upward through stands of pine and aspen, the horse's steady gait rhythmic in the darkness. Lila had lost track of how long they'd been riding when the trees finally parted to reveal a clearing bathed in moonlight. A cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of towering peaks, solid and weathered, with smoke curling from its stone chimney. "We're here," Colt said, his voice rumbling through his chest where Lila's back rested against him. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Her legs, numb from the long ride, buckled slightly, and his hand steadied her at the waist until she found her footing. The touch was brief, impersonal, but Lila felt its warmth long after he'd stepped away to tend to the horse. The cabin's interior was simple but clean. One large room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with two chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a bed in one corner. Another doorway led to what appeared to be a small additional room. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone but hadn't given in to squalor. "You can have the bedroom," he said, gesturing to the doorway. "I'll take the main room." Lila looked through the door to see a narrow bed with a colorful quilt, a small dresser, and, her heart clenched, a child's rocking horse in the corner, covered in dust. "This was," she began, "my daughter's room." His voice was carefully neutral. "Haven't had cause to use it since. I can't take—" "You can and you will." He moved to the fireplace, adding logs to the banked coals. "There's a trunk at the foot of the bed. My wife's things. Should be something that fits near enough. Get some sleep. We'll sort the rest come morning." Lila wanted to protest further, but exhaustion weighed her down like lead. She mumbled a thank you and retreated to the small room. The trunk held carefully folded dresses, simpler than what she'd worn in town, but well made. She changed into a nightgown that smelled faintly of lavender and lay down on the narrow bed. Despite her fatigue, sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face twisted in disgust, heard the whispers of the townspeople, felt those hands reaching for her in the shed. When she finally dozed, nightmares chased her. She was back at the Golden Horseshoe. But this time, the mountain man wasn't kind. This time, he was just another predator. and she woke gasping, her nightgown soaked with cold sweat. Dawn was breaking, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. She could hear movement in the main room, the clink of metal, the splash of water. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she ventured out. Colt stood at the stove, his back to her, making coffee. He'd changed into fresh clothes, his hair damp as if he'd washed at the pump outside. "There's a basin in your room," he said without turning. "Pump's out back when you need it. Privy's behind the woodshed." "Thank you." She hesitated. "Mr. Brennan. Colt Brennan. But just Colt is fine." "Mr. Brennan. Colt. Why did you come back to town? How did you know I'd need help?" He finally turned, his gray eyes unreadable. "Came down for supplies. Heard the talk." He shrugged. "Figured there might be trouble." "But why do you care what happens to me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything. Maybe because you reminded me that there's still kindness in the world, even in the darkest places." "Does it matter?" Lila thought about it. "No, I suppose it doesn't." The days fell into a pattern. Colt would rise before dawn, tend to the horses and whatever animals he kept, then disappear into the forest to check his trap lines or hunt. Lila found herself taking over the domestic chores without being asked. Cooking, cleaning, mending clothes that had gone too long without attention. It was a simple life, but not an easy one. Water had to be hauled from the pump. Wood constantly chopped and stacked. Food preserved against the coming winter. She learned to bank the fire at night so coals would remain for morning, to judge the weather by the feel of the wind, to tell the difference between the tracks of deer and elk in the snow. They worked mostly in silence those first weeks. Colt was not a man given to idle chatter, and Lila found the quiet soothing after the constant whispers and stares of town. When they did talk, it was about practical things, the need for more firewood, the elk herd moving to lower elevations, the storm building over the peaks. But slowly, carefully, like wild animals learning to trust, they began to share more. It usually happened in the evenings, sitting by the fire after supper. The darkness and the flickering flames seemed to make confidences easier. "She was 6, Colt said one night, apropos of nothing. Lila knew immediately he meant his daughter. Mary, like her mother, had the same laugh, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. Lila waited, sensing that pushing would shut him down. The fever came on sudden. One day they were fine. The next, he stared into the fire. "I rode for the doctor. Rode so hard I near killed the horse. But by the time we got back, Mary was gone. Elizabeth, my wife, she held on 2 more days. Long enough to say goodbye." "I'm sorry," Lila whispered, the words inadequate but necessary. "After that, couldn't stand the farm. Every corner held memories. So I came up here. Been here 2 years now." "Don't you get lonely?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that made her heart skip. "I did." As autumn progressed toward winter, Lila found herself adapting to the rhythm of mountain life. She learned to read the sky for weather, to move quietly enough not to startle the deer that sometimes came to drink at the stream below the cabin. Her hands, already work-worn from years of taking and washing, grew stronger from hauling water and working the pump. One evening, an early snowstorm caught Colt on the trap line. Lila paced the cabin, worry gnawing at her as the wind howled and snow piled against the windows. When he finally stumbled through the door, half frozen and coated in ice, she didn't think, just acted. "Get those wet clothes off," she ordered, already pulling blankets from the chest. "You'll catch your death." He was shaking too hard to argue or protest modesty. She helped him strip down to his underclothes, trying not to notice the broad expanse of his chest, the old scars that marked his skin. She wrapped him in blankets and pushed him into the chair by the fire, then set about making hot coffee laced with whiskey from the bottle he kept for medicinal purposes. "Drink," she commanded, pressing the cup into his hands. He drank, his eyes never leaving her face as she fussed over him, adding more wood to the fire, fetching additional blankets. When the shaking finally stopped, he caught her hand as she passed. "Thank you," he said simply. She looked down at their joined hands, his so large and rough, hers small but no longer soft. "You saved me first. That's not why you're here," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything. Lila May. Need you to know that." She squeezed his hand gently before releasing it. "I know." That night marked a change between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to shrink. Colt started teaching her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and grip until she could hit a target more often than not. She taught him to make the biscuits her grandmother had been famous for, laughing when his first attempt produced rocks hard enough to use as ammunition. They began talking more freely. About books, he had a surprising collection. About dreams abandoned and hopes nearly forgotten. She told him about her father, a good man who'd worked himself to death trying to provide for his family. He told her about the farm he'd once loved, the plans he'd had before fever stole everything. One night, as November winds rattled the windows, Lila woke to the sound of her own screaming. Another nightmare. She was back in that shed, but this time no one came to save her. Strong arms wrapped around her, and she found herself sobbing against Colt's chest as he held her, murmuring soothing nonsense into her hair. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I didn't mean to wake you. Hush now." His hand stroked her back, gentle as if she were a spooked horse. "Nothing to be sorry for. We all have our demons." She pulled back to look at him in the dim light. "Do yours ever go away?" "No," he said honestly. "But they get quieter, especially when you're not facing them alone." They stayed like that for a long moment, her hands fisted in his nightshirt, his arms steady around her. Then, as if suddenly aware of the impropriety, they separated. He returned to the main room, she to her bed. But something fundamental had shifted. The last wall between them had crumbled, and what lay beyond it was as terrifying as it was inevitable. Winter arrived in earnest the next week, sealing them into their mountain sanctuary with walls of white. And in that isolation, two wounded souls continued their careful dance towards something neither quite dared to name. The first blizzard of December trapped them inside for 3 days straight. Snow piled halfway up the windows, and the wind howled like a living thing trying to claw its way through the walls. Colt had prepared well, cords of wood stacked under the lean-to, smoked meat and preserved vegetables in the root cellar, sacks of flour and cornmeal in the pantry. But nothing could have prepared them for the forced intimacy of those long, dark days. By the third morning, Lila was teaching him to play chess on a set his wife had loved, carved from pine and oak by some long-ago craftsman. He was a quick learner, thoughtful and strategic, though she still won more often than not. "You're holding back," she accused after a particularly easy victory. He raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think that?" "Because I saw you considering that move with your knight 5 turns ago. It would have put me in check." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, still a rare sight, but becoming less so. "Maybe I like watching you think. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating." Heat rushed to her cheeks. She moved to reset the board, but he caught her hand, his calloused thumb brushing across her knuckles. The touch sent lightning through her veins. "Lila." His voice was rough, uncertain. She met his eyes, gray as the storm outside, and saw her own longing reflected there, but also fear. They both carried too many scars, too much loss. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, until he released her hand and stood abruptly. "I should check the animals." She watched him bundle into his heavy coat and disappear into the swirling white, her hand still tingling where he'd touched it, when he returned an hour later, covered in snow and shivering. They didn't speak of it, but the awareness remained, electric in the air between them. The storm broke that night, leaving the world crystalline and sharp under a cold moon. Lila stood at the window, marveling at the untouched beauty, when she heard the soft scrape of a chair behind her. "Can't sleep?" Colt asked. It's too beautiful to miss. She gestured at the moonlit landscape. In town, snow just meant muddy streets and harder work. But here it's clean. He finished. Pure, like the world starting over. She turned to find him closer than expected. Close enough to see the faint lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. Is that what we're doing? Starting over? Maybe. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped. If folks can manage such things. My mother used to say everyone deserves a second chance. Your mother also cast you out for trying to save her life. The words stung, but they were true. She was scared, disappointed. I failed to be the daughter she wanted. No. The word came out fierce. You were exactly the daughter she needed, strong enough to sacrifice everything for love. If she couldn't see that, it's her failing, not yours. Tears pricked Lila's eyes. No one had defended her choices, not once since that night. You don't think less of me, for what I was willing to do? He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I think you're the bravest woman I've ever known. And I think... He paused, then forged ahead. I think I'm falling in love with you? Lila Mae Collins, God help me, but I am. The words hung in the air between them, momentous and terrifying. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. Colt, I know I've got no right. I'm older, set in my ways, still half broken from losing them. And you deserve better than a hermit hiding from the world, but I needed to say it, at least once. She closed the distance between them, placing her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart race to match hers. You're not broken. You're healing. We both are. His hand covered hers, pressing it closer. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between that night at the saloon and now, I fell in love with you too. Despite all the reasons I shouldn't, despite being terrified of wanting something again. He made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. She wrapped her arms around him, holding tight, feeling the tremors that ran through his strong frame. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Lila, it's been so long since I felt anything but grief. I don't know if I remember how to do this right. Then we'll learn together. She reached up to cup his face, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. If you'll have me. His answer was in the way he lowered his head, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. He kissed like a man starved for human connection, desperate and tender all at once. Her hands tangled in his hair, and he groaned softly against her mouth, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? I can't lose someone else. Lila, it would kill me. You won't lose me. She promised. I'm not going anywhere. Christmas approached with no fanfare. Mountain life didn't pause for holidays. But Lila found herself humming as she worked, and more than once caught Colt watching her with an expression that made warmth pool in her belly. She used precious sugar and the last of the dried apples to make a pie, and he surprised her with a wooden hair comb he'd been carving in secret, delicate as butterfly wings. They sat by the fire that evening, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and she thought she'd never been happier. Tell me about your Christmases before, she said softly. He was quiet, but it was the comfortable quiet of gathering thoughts, not the closed-off silence of old pain. Elizabeth loved Christmas, would start planning in October, what to make for Mary, what special treats to cook. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine for weeks. She sounds wonderful. She was. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. She would have liked you, would have admired your strength. You don't feel guilty being with me? He considered this. At first, maybe like I was betraying her memory. But then I realized she wouldn't want me living like a ghost. She'd box my ears for wasting years feeling sorry for myself. A soft chuckle. She was fierce about living fully. Every day was a gift to her. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, and I think she sent you to me somehow, to remind me that life goes on, that it's meant to be lived, not just endured. They made love for the first time that night, with snow falling soft outside and the fire burning low. He was gentle, reverent, treating her body like something precious. She'd been afraid. The girls at the saloon had told terrible stories about men and their appetites, but there was nothing frightening in the way he touched her, nothing but tenderness and a desperate need that matched her own. Afterward, they lay entwined on the bearskin rug before the hearth, skin cooling in the night air. He traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and she listened to his heartbeat gradually slow. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, more than I thought I could love anything again." Winter deepened, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed. They moved through their days with new awareness of each other, a brush of hands while cooking, a stolen kiss by the woodpile, the comfort of sleeping curled together when the nights grew bitter cold. Lila learned the different moods of the mountain, when storms were building, when it was safe to venture out, how to read the tracks in the snow that told stories of the wildlife around them. She learned too the moods of the man she loved, when memories pressed too close and he needed silence, when he was ready to share another piece of his past, when desire would darken his eyes and he'd pull her close with gentle urgency. They were snowed in more often than not, but she didn't mind. Each day brought new discoveries. The way he laughed, really laughed, when she pelted him with a snowball during a rare playful moment, the songs he hummed while working, old ballads from his childhood, the careful way he tended her when she burned her hand on the stove, as if she were made of spun glass. "I'm not fragile," she told him one evening as he fussed over a small cut on her finger. "I know that." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing the bandage gently. "You're the strongest person I know. But that doesn't mean I can't take care of you." She thought of all the ways he already did, keeping the wood box full so she never had to venture into the cold, always giving her the larger portion at meals, the way he'd fashioned her new boots from deer hide when hers wore through. "You do take care of me," she said softly, "in ways no one ever has." As February approached with no break in the weather, they were down to careful rations, but neither worried over much. They had each other, and that seemed to be enough. In the cocoon of their mountain refuge, the outside world ceased to matter. There was only the two of them, building something new from the ashes of their former lives. But spring would come, as it always did. And with it, decisions that couldn't be put off forever. The world they'd left behind hadn't disappeared. It was only sleeping under the snow, waiting to intrude once more on their hard-won peace. For now, though, there was only winter, and warmth, and love growing stronger with each passing day. Spring arrived gradually, first as a softening in the air, then as patches of brown earth appearing through the melting snow. The creek below the cabin swelled with runoff, its voice changing from a whisper to a roar, and with the thaw came a different rhythm to their days. Colt taught Lila to help with the spring trapping, showing her how to set the lines without harming the younger animals they wanted to leave for breeding. She learned to skin and prepare pelts, her fingers growing nimble with practice. They worked side by side in companionable silence, and she treasured these moments, the simple pleasure of shared labor, of building something together. One morning in early April, as she was hanging laundry on the line strung between two pines, she heard him splitting wood nearby. The rhythmic thunk of the axe stopped, and she turned to find him watching her, axe resting on his shoulder, a look on his face that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Just thinking how natural you look here, like you belong." He set the axe aside and crossed to her, "Like you've always belonged." She abandoned the wet shirt in her hands to step into his embrace. "I feel like I belong, for the first time in my life." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, until her knees went weak and she clung to his shoulders. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. Tonight, he murmured against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. But first, there was work to be done. They spent the afternoon checking trap lines together, Lila learning to move quietly through the forest, to read the subtle signs of animal passage. On the way back, heavily laden with pelts, they stopped to rest by a small waterfall where snowmelt had created a crystal pool. "It's beautiful," Lila breathed, enchanted by the way the late afternoon sun created rainbows in the mist. "Not as beautiful as you," Colt said softly. She turned to tease him about becoming sentimental, but the words died on her lips at the intensity in his gaze. He set down his pack and drew her close, and there, beside the rushing water, with pine needles soft beneath them and the sky vast above, they made love with an urgency born of spring itself, life returning after a long winter. Afterwards, lying in his arms with her hair spread across his chest, she felt complete in a way she never had before. "I love you," she said, the words still feeling miraculous on her tongue. "And I love you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "More than I have words for." They dressed reluctantly as the air cooled, gathering their packs to continue home. But as they crested the last ridge before the cabin, Colt suddenly stopped, his body tensing. "What is it?" Lila asked, instantly alert. "Horse tracks," he said quietly, pointing to fresh marks in the muddy trail. "Two riders, recent." Her heart began to pound. In all their months here, no one had visited. The cabin was too remote, too well hidden. Maybe they're just passing through. But even as she said it, she could see smoke rising from their chimney. And worse, two horses tied at the lean-to. "Visitors." Her hand found his, gripping tight. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his free hand moving to the rifle slung across his back. They approached cautiously, but before they could reach the door, it opened. A man stepped out, tall, lean, wearing the badge of a territorial marshal. Behind him, another figure emerged, and Lila's heart stopped. "Thomas?" she whispered. Her brother looked older, harder, his face weathered by 2 years under the California sun. His eyes widened when he saw her, taking in her simple dress, her sun-browned skin, the way she stood so close to Colt. "Lila May," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you." "How did you find me?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Took some doing." The marshal, who introduced himself as Ben Crawford, said, "Your brother here came back to Silver Creek looking for you. Found out what happened. The whole story." His eyes flicked between her and Colt. "When folks said you'd gone off with a mountain man, we started asking around the trading posts. Finally got a lead from a trapper who'd seen Brennan here buying supplies for 2. Thomas stepped forward, his face earnest. "Lila, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you to deal with everything alone. I heard about Ma, about what you had to do." His voice broke. "I should have been there. Why are you here now?" She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "It's been 6 months. I came as soon as I got word Ma was sick, but the letter took months to reach me. And then the journey back." He swallowed hard. "She's asking for you, Lila. She's dying, really dying this time, and she wants to make things right." The world seemed to tilt. Lila felt Colt's hand at her back, steady and strong. "She threw me out, called me a—" She couldn't finish. She was wrong. Thomas said firmly, "She knows that now. The whole town knows it. What you did, Lila, you saved her life. She's had months to think about that, to realize what kind of courage it took." Marshal Crawford cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm not here in any official capacity regarding past events. Your brother hired me as a guide and for protection on the journey. What happened in Silver Creek is no concern of mine." Lila looked up at Colt, seeing her own turmoil reflected in his eyes. "I don't know." "She doesn't have long," Thomas said quietly. "Maybe a week. Doc Hartley says maybe less." That night, Lila lay awake in Colt's arms, her mind churning. The cabin that had been their sanctuary suddenly felt fragile, temporary. The outside world had found them, and with it, all the complications they'd left behind. "You have to go," Colt said into the darkness. "I know." She turned in his arms to face him. "Come with me." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "If you want me to." "Of course I want you to. I need you with me. Even back there, where everyone knows what happened?" She pressed her palm to his cheek. "Especially there. I'm not ashamed of loving you. I'm not ashamed of anything anymore." He caught her hand, kissing her palm. "Then we'll go. Together." They made love slowly, tenderly, as if trying to memorize each other. Every touch felt precious, every whispered endearment a promise. When release finally claimed them, Lila found herself crying. For her mother, for the innocence she'd lost, for the uncertain future that awaited them. The next morning dawned clear and bright. They packed quickly, efficiently, taking only what they needed for the journey. Lila wore one of her old dresses, altered to fit her new strength, and tried not to think about how strange it would feel to walk the streets of Silver Creek again. Thomas and the marshal were already saddled and waiting. Her brother's eyes softened when he saw her. "You look good, Lila, strong, happy." "I am," she said simply. Colt emerged from the cabin carrying their packs, and Thomas straightened, extending his hand. "Oh, I should thank you for taking care of my sister." Colt looked at the offered hand for a moment, then shook it. "Your sister doesn't need taking care of. She's the strongest woman I know." Something passed between the two men, understanding, perhaps, or mutual respect. Thomas nodded and mounted his horse. Lila took one last look at the cabin that had been their haven. The morning sun painted it gold, and she tried to fix the image in her memory. The rough logs, the stone chimney, the small garden plot she'd planned to plant come full spring. "We'll come back," Colt said quietly beside her. "This isn't goodbye." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and let him help her mount his horse. As they had that first night, she rode with him, safe in the circle of his arms. But this time, she wasn't running away from something. She was riding toward it, toward forgiveness, toward closure, toward whatever future awaited them beyond the mountains. The trail wound downward, leaving winter behind, carrying them back to the world they'd left. But they were not the same people who had fled in darkness. They had been transformed by love, by trust, by the simple act of choosing each other every day through a long mountain winter. And whatever awaited them in Silver Creek, they would face it together. That, Lila thought as she leaned back against Colt's solid warmth, was enough. It was everything. The journey down from the mountains took 2 days. As they descended, the air grew warmer. The trees changed from pine to oak, and with each mile, Lila felt her chest tighten with dread. When Silver Creek finally came into view, nestled in its valley with smoke rising from chimneys she knew so well, her hands trembled where they gripped Colt's arms. "Steady," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I'm right here." Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People stopped in the street to stare. Conversations halted mid-sentence, and children were quickly ushered inside by their mothers. But something was different from before. Along with the judgment and curiosity, Lila saw something else in some faces. Shame, perhaps, or regret. Thomas led them directly to the small cabin on Mill Street. It looked smaller than Lila remembered, shabbier, with weeds growing where her mother's prized flower garden used to be. Her brother dismounted first, helping her down while Colt secured the horses. "She's inside," Thomas said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson from church has been caring for her, but..." The door opened before he could finish. Mrs. Henderson, the same woman who had told Sarah the truth about Lila's sacrifice, stood in the doorway. Her face crumpled when she saw Lila. "Oh, child," she said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Oh, what we did to you. Can you ever forgive us?" Lila didn't answer, couldn't answer. She pushed past the older woman into the dim interior, her eyes taking a moment to adjust. The smell hit her first. Medicine and sickness and impending death. Then she saw her. Sarah Collins lay propped against pillows in the same bed where Lila had nursed her through the first bout of consumption. But this was worse. Her mother had wasted away to almost nothing, her face skull-like, her breathing a horrible rattle. Yet her eyes, when they found Lila, burned with desperate awareness. "My girl," Sarah whispered, one skeletal hand lifting from the coverlet. "My brave, brave girl." Lila crossed the room on unsteady legs and took that hand. So light it felt like holding a bird's bones. "Mama, I was wrong." The words came with effort, each breath a struggle. "So wrong. You saved me, and I threw you away like trash. My pride, my stupid pride." "Shh," Lila soothed, though her own tears were falling fast. "It's all right. Mama, I understand." "No." Sarah's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Let me say it. Please, I've practiced." "Wanted to get it right." She drew a rattling breath. "You were brave where I was cowardly, strong where I was weak. You did what I could never do, sacrificed everything for love. Mama, I'm proud of you," Sarah continued, her voice fading but determined. "So proud. You're the daughter any mother would be blessed to have. I was too blind to see it." Lila bent to kiss her mother's forehead, tasting salt from her own tears. "I forgive you, Mama. Of course I forgive you." Sarah's eyes moved past her to the doorway, where Colt stood quietly. "This him? The one who—" "Yes." Lila beckoned him forward. "Mama, this is Colt Brennan." Colt approached the bed with the same care he used around spooked animals. He took off his hat, holding it in both hands. "Ma'am," Sarah studied him with those fever-bright eyes, "you love my daughter? With everything I have?" He answered simply, "Good." A ghost of a smile touched her cracked lips. That's good." Her gaze returned to Lila. "I have something. Thomas, the box." Her brother produced a small wooden box from the mantel. Inside was Sarah's wedding ring, a few coins, and a folded paper. "Had the Reverend write it down," Sarah wheezed. "My blessing. For your marriage. In case anyone questions." Fresh tears blurred Lila's vision. "Mama, you didn't have to?" "Yes, I did. Let me do this one thing right." She pressed the ring into Lila's hand. "Your father would want you to have it. Would be proud, too." The effort exhausted her. Her eyes fluttered closed, though her breathing continued its painful rhythm. "Mrs." Henderson stepped forward. "She does this," she said softly. "Saves her strength for when you visit. We should let her rest now." Lila nodded, pressing one last kiss to her mother's hand before rising. Outside, she stood in the small yard where she'd played as a child, where she'd hung washing just months ago, where her whole life had changed with one desperate decision. "You all right?" Colt asked, his hand warm on her shoulder. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I thought I'd be angry, but I just feel sad for all the time we lost, for what could have been." "Regret's a heavy burden," he said. "But at least you got to hear her say it. Not everyone gets that chance." They took rooms at the boarding house, Mrs. Garrett's initial refusal crumbling when Thomas made it clear they'd take their business elsewhere if she couldn't accommodate his sister. The news of their arrival spread quickly, and by evening, a small crowd had gathered outside. Lila watched from the window as people milled about, unsure of their purpose. Some looked angry, others curious, but more than a few appeared troubled. Then she recognized a figure pushing through the crowd. Reverend Patterson. "He wants to speak with you," Mrs. Garrett reported, clearly flustered. "Says it's important." Lila looked at Colt, who shrugged. "Your choice." She squared her shoulders. "Send him up." The Reverend who entered their room looked older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines on his face. He held his hat like a shield, turning it round and round in his hands. "Miss Collins," he began, then cleared his throat. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm not sure. We're not married yet, Lila said evenly. Though we intend to be. Yes, well. He shifted uncomfortably. I've come to, that is, the congregation has asked me to. We were wrong. Miss Collins, what we did to you was not Christian. It was not kind. It was not right. Lila waited, saying nothing. Your mother's story, once she could speak of it, spread through town. How sick she was, how desperate you were, how you tried everything else first. He met her eyes with difficulty. We judged you harshly for an act of love, while ignoring our own failures of charity. If we had helped when you needed it, if we had shown Christian kindness instead of turning you away. I might never have been in that position, Lila finished quietly. Yes, the word came out strangled. We failed you, I failed you, and I've come to ask your forgiveness, and to say that you and Mr. Brennan are welcome in church. If you wish to attend, more than welcome. It would be our honor. Lila felt Colt tense beside her, but she placed a calming hand on his arm. Thank you for the apology. Reverend, I'll consider your invitation. After he left, they sat in silence for a moment. Then Colt spoke. You don't owe them anything. Not your forgiveness. Not your presence. I know. She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid strength. But holding on to anger is like drinking poison. It hurts me more than them. The next days passed in a blur. Sarah rallied once more, long enough to see Thomas and to extract his promise to look after Lila. She died at sunset 3 days after their arrival, her children at her bedside, finally at peace. The funeral drew an unexpected crowd. People who had shunned Lila months before now came to pay their respects, many with tears in their eyes. She stood between Colt and Thomas, accepting condolences with quiet grace, though she noticed how many people couldn't quite meet her eyes. It was Jake Turner who surprised her most. He approached after the service, one arm still in a sling from where Colt had broken it that night in the shed. Miss Collins, he said, his face flushed with shame. I need to apologize. What I did, what I tried to do. There's no excuse. None at all. No, Lila agreed. There isn't. He flinched but continued. I was drunk, but that don't matter. I treated you like you weren't a person. Like what happened at the saloon meant you were fair game. I was wrong. Dead wrong. She studied him for a moment. This boy who'd tried to assault her, who'd seen her as less than human because of one desperate choice. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Turner. I hope you've learned from it. Yes, ma'am, I have. I swear I have. As he slunk away, Colt murmured, You're more forgiving than I would be. Forgiveness isn't for him, she replied. It's for me, so I can leave this place without carrying its poison with me. That evening, they sat with Thomas in the empty cabin, sorting through their mother's few possessions. There wasn't much, some clothes, a Bible, a few pieces of jewelry, the quilts she'd made over the years. What will you do now? Lila asked her brother. Thomas shrugged. Head back to California, I suppose. I've got a claim there, a partner. It's showing promise. He paused. You could come with me, both of you. Start fresh where nobody knows your history. Lila looked at Colt, seeing her own answer reflected in his eyes. We have a home, she said simply. In the mountains. That's where we belong. Thomas nodded, understanding. Will you marry before you go back? Tomorrow, Colt said, speaking for the first time in hours. If Lila agrees, Reverend Patterson offered. Seems fitting to make it official here, where it all started. Lila smiled. The first real smile she'd managed since arriving in Silver Creek. Yes, tomorrow. And so, as another sunset painted the sky, she found herself looking forward instead of back. Tomorrow she would marry the man she loved in the church where she'd been cast out. She would do it not for the town's approval or to prove a point, but because she wanted to begin their married life with no shadows following them back to their mountain sanctuary. The girl who had walked into the Golden Horseshoe Saloon 6 months ago, desperate and afraid, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned the price of sacrifice, the power of love. and the freedom that came with choosing her own path, regardless of what others thought. Tomorrow, she would be Lila Mae Brennan. Tonight, she was simply herself, scarred but strong, tested but not broken, ready for whatever came next. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of apple blossoms through the open window. Lila stood before the cracked mirror in her childhood room, wearing her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, smelling of lavender sachets and memories. Mrs. Henderson and 2 other church women had arrived early, bearing flowers from their gardens and nervous smiles. They helped her with her hair, weaving white daisies through the braids, their fingers gentle but their chatter stilted, as if they weren't quite sure how to bridge the chasm their judgment had created. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Henderson finally said, tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud." Lila met her gaze in the mirror. "She told me she was..." "That's enough." A knock at the door interrupted the awkward silence. Thomas entered, looking uncommonly formal in his best suit. His eyes softened when he saw her. "You look like her," he said quietly. "Like Ma did in that old daguerreotype Pa kept." "I wish they could both be here," Lila admitted. "They are, in their way." He offered his arm. "Ready?" The walk to the church felt both endless and all too brief. People lined the street, not the hostile crowd she'd feared, but quiet observers, some nodding respectfully as she passed. Children who'd been told to avoid her now peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts with curious eyes. At the church doors, Thomas paused. "Lila, I need to say something. What you did for Ma, I couldn't have done it. The courage that took, the sacrifice. I ran away to California because I couldn't face Pa's death, couldn't handle the responsibility. You stayed. You did what needed doing. We all do what we can," she said softly. "No," he insisted. "Some of us do what's easy. You did what was right, even when it cost you everything. That's rare. Lila Mae. That's special." Inside the church, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in gold. The pews were fuller than she'd expected. Not packed, but with enough witnesses to make it clear that Silver Creek was trying, in its way, to make amends. But Lila had eyes only for the man waiting at the altar. Colt stood tall and solid, wearing a new black suit that couldn't quite civilize him. His gray eyes found hers across the distance, and the love she saw there made her breath catch. This man who'd lived as a hermit, who'd shut himself away from the world after tragedy. He was standing in front of a town that whispered about him, facing their judgment for her sake. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with more warmth than she'd ever heard from him, as if trying to pour months of regret into this one act of blessing. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence was profound, not the silence of intimidation, but of acceptance, finally granted. "Do you, Colt Brennan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, so long as you both shall live?" "I do." His voice was steady. "Sure, carrying to every corner of the church. Do you, Lila Mae Collins, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, so long as you both shall live?" "I do." The words came out strong, triumphant even. She was choosing this man, this life, in front of everyone who tried to shame her for an earlier choice. There was power in that, and redemption too. When Colt kissed her, gentle and reverent, a murmur ran through the congregation, not disapproval, but something that sounded almost like approval, or relief, as if the town itself could finally exhale, having witnessed love triumph over judgment. The small reception in the church hall was awkward but well-meaning. Women who'd crossed the street to avoid her now pressed her hands and wished her well. Men who'd looked at her with either disgust or speculation now shook Colt's hand and welcomed him to the community. even as he made it clear they wouldn't be staying. It was Sheriff Dixon who provided the day's biggest surprise. He approached as they were preparing to leave, his weathered face grave. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, tipping his hat. "Mr. Brennan, I've been doing some investigating since you folks arrived back in town." Lila tensed, and Colt's hand found hers, protective and reassuring. "About that night at the saloon," the sheriff continued. "Seems Jake Morrison's been running quite an operation. Girls brought in from other territories, promises made and broken, debts that could never be paid off. The kind of thing that's been going on under my nose while I looked the other way because that's what folks expected." "Why are you telling us this?" Colt asked, his voice neutral. "Because I wanted you to know that what happened to you, Mrs. Brennan, you weren't the first girl he tried to trap. You were just the first one lucky enough to find a different way out." He shifted uncomfortably. "I've shut him down. Him and his nephew are looking at serious charges. It doesn't undo what you went through, but maybe it prevents another desperate girl from facing the same choice." "Thank you," Lila managed, though her throat felt tight. The sheriff nodded and moved away, leaving them to absorb this news. Around them, the reception continued, this strange gathering of people trying to atone for cruelty with cucumber sandwiches and weak punch. "Can we go?" Lila whispered to Colt. "I want to go home." He understood immediately which home she meant. Within an hour, they were mounted and ready, their few possessions packed, final farewells said. Thomas stood by his horse, ready to ride with them as far as the crossroads before heading west to California. "You'll write?" he asked Lila, as she adjusted her riding skirts, much more practical than the wedding dress she'd carefully packed away. "When I can. The mail doesn't come regular to the mountains, but I'll try. And if you need anything—" "We won't," Colt interrupted, not unkindly. "But thank you for the offer." They rode out of Silver Creek as the afternoon shadows grew long, 3 figures against the darkening sky. At the crossroads, Thomas pulled up, turning to face them one last time. "Be happy," he said simply. "Both of you. Be happy enough to make up for all the sorrow." "We will," Lila promised, leaning from her saddle to kiss his cheek. "Take care of yourself. Thomas, find your fortune. Find a good woman. Have the life Pa would have wanted for you." He nodded, too moved for words, and spurred his horse west. They watched until he was just a speck against the horizon, then turned their own mount toward the mountains. The journey back felt different than their descent days earlier. There was no urgency now, no dread of what awaited them. They camped that night under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, and Lila lay in her husband's arms. Husband. What a wonderful word, listening to night sounds and feeling peace settle into her bones. "Any regrets?" Colt asked softly. "About what?" "Coming back, facing all that again. You could have just sent word, stayed safe in the mountains." She considered this, then shook her head. "No, I needed to see her, to hear her words, to forgive and be forgiven, and—" She traced patterns on his chest through his shirt. "I needed them to see us, to see that their judgment didn't break me, that I found love not in spite of what happened, but because of it. If I hadn't made that choice, I never would have met you." "Fate works in strange ways," he agreed. "Do you believe in fate?" "I didn't used to. Thought life was just random cruelty and occasional kindness. But you walking into that saloon the same night I came down from the mountains? Both of us broken. Both of us needing something we couldn't name. That feels like more than chance." They reached the cabin the next afternoon, and Lila felt her heart lift at the sight of it. Their refuge, their sanctuary, their home. Everything was as they'd left it. The stack of firewood, the garden plot waiting to be planted, the mountains standing eternal guard. That evening, as she prepared their first meal as husband and wife in their own home, Lila found herself humming. Colt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I knew was possible," she answered truthfully. They stood like that for a moment, watching the sun set through their window, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Then Lila turned in his arms, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me as more than my worst moment. For giving me a chance to be myself again. For loving me." He kissed her then, deep and sweet. And when he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "Thank you for reminding me how to live again. For bringing light back into my darkness. For choosing me." Later, as they lay entwined in their bed, Lila thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. A desperate choice born of love for her mother had led to exile, shame, and ultimately to a love deeper than any she could have imagined. The town that had cast her out had, in its way, given her the greatest gift, freedom to forge her own path, to find her own happiness. "I love you, Mrs. Brennan." Colt murmured against her hair. "And I love you, Mr. Brennan," she replied, savoring the newness of the names. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and the wind whispered through the pines. Inside, two souls who had found each other against all odds settled into sleep, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. They were home. Summer arrived in the mountains with an explosion of wildflowers and the sweet scent of pine sap warming in the sun. Lila knelt in her garden, hands deep in the rich soil, planting the seeds she'd carefully saved. Carrots, potatoes, beans, the hardy vegetables that would see them through another winter. But this time, she was planting for 3. She hadn't told Colt yet. She'd only been certain for a week, and she wanted to find the right moment, the right words. The knowledge sat within her like a secret sun, warming her from the inside out. "You're smiling at that dirt like it holds all the world's treasures," Colt observed from where he was repairing the fence around the garden plot. "Maybe it does," she replied, sitting back on her heels to look at him. "We plant tiny seeds, and they become food to sustain us. Seems like treasure enough to me." He set down his hammer and crossed to her, helping her to her feet. "You've been different lately, happier, if that's possible." "Have I?" She brushed dirt from her hands, her heart beating faster. Perhaps this was the moment. "Lila." He studied her face with those penetrating gray eyes. "Is there something you want to tell me?" She took his hands, placed them on her still flat belly, and watched understanding dawn across his features. His eyes widened, then filled with something that looked like wonder mixed with fear. Are we? "Come January, there'll be a baby in this cabin again," she confirmed, tears pricking her eyes at his expression. For a moment, he stood frozen. Then he pulled her against him so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. She felt him shaking and realized he was crying, this strong, silent man who had endured so much loss. "Colt?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Is this all right? I know after Mary—" He pulled back to cup her face in his hands, and she saw joy battling with old grief in his eyes. "All right? Lila, you've given me everything. A reason to live again. Love I didn't think I'd ever feel again, and now—" His voice broke. "Now a chance to be a father again. I'm terrified, but I'm also— God help me, I'm so happy I can't breathe." She kissed him then, tasting salt from both their tears, and felt the last shadow of the past lift from his shoulders. They would always carry their losses. His wife and daughter, her innocence and her mother. But now they had this bright promise of the future growing between them. The summer months passed in a blur of preparation. Colt threw himself into improving the cabin with renewed energy, adding a proper floor to replace the old planks, building furniture with careful hands, a new bed frame, a rocking chair that made Lila cry when she saw it, knowing what memories it must stir for him. She sewed tiny clothes from the softest material they could trade for, knitted blankets during the long evenings, and tried not to think too much about the fact that the nearest doctor was a day's ride away. Mountain women had been birthing babies without help for generations. She could do this. As autumn painted the aspens gold, her condition became obvious. Colt could barely let her out of his sight. hovering as she did her daily chores until she had to laughingly threaten to banish him to the woodshed if he didn't stop treating her like spun glass. "I'm not fragile," she insisted one morning as he tried to take the water bucket from her hands. "Mountain women work until the baby comes. Mountain women haven't been through what you have," he countered, but let her keep the bucket. "And their husbands haven't lost—" He stopped, swallowing hard. She set the bucket down and took his face in her hands. "I'm not Elizabeth. This baby isn't Mary. Lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. Doesn't it?" His voice was rough with fear. "I found happiness twice. Why not tragedy? Because we've both had our share of tragedy," she said firmly. "Now it's time for joy. I can feel it. Colt, this child is strong. We're going to be fine." He pulled her close, his hand splaying protectively over her rounded belly. "I can't lose you, either of you. I wouldn't survive it. You won't have to." The first snow came early that year, October bringing a blizzard that trapped them inside for 3 days. Lila didn't mind. She spent the time teaching Colt to knit, laughing at his fumbling attempts with the needles, his hands too large for such delicate work. "I've skinned bears with more grace than this," he grumbled, frowning at the tangled mess of yarn in his lap. "Bears don't require even stitches," she teased. "Here, like this." By November, she was ungainly enough that simple tasks became challenges. Colt had taken over most of the heavy work without comment, and she found herself spending more time in the rocking chair he'd made, working on the endless preparations for their child. It was during one such quiet evening, snow falling soft outside and the fire crackling warmth into the cabin, that the past came calling one more time. They heard the horses before they saw them, multiple riders approaching through the snow. Colt immediately reached for his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered, moving to the window, but the voice that called out was familiar. "Brennan, Mrs. Brennan!" "It's Marshal Crawford. I've got a letter needs delivering." Colt relaxed fractionally, but kept the rifle ready as he opened the door. The marshal stood in the swirling snow. 2 other men with him. "Sorry to disturb you folks," Crawford said, his eyes widening slightly as he took in Lila's obvious condition. "But this came to Silver Creek marked urgent, from California." Lila's heart clenched. "Thomas." She struggled to her feet as Colt took the letter, her hands shaking as she broke the seal. The news was better than she'd feared. Thomas wrote that he'd struck a significant vein in his claim, enough to set him up properly. He was engaged to a merchant's daughter from Sacramento, planning a spring wedding, but it was the last paragraph that made her sink back into the chair. "I've set aside a portion of the gold for you and your family. Consider it a wedding gift arriving late, or an early gift for my niece or nephew. It's enough to ensure you'll never face the kind of desperate choices you once did. The bank in Silver Creek has the details. Be happy, sister. You deserve all the joy this world can offer." "Good news?" Crawford asked, still lingering in the doorway. "The best." Lila managed through tears. "My brother, he's well. He's getting married." "That's fine news, ma'am." The marshal shifted, seeming to remember something. "Oh, and the town asked me to tell you, if you need the doctor when your time comes, they'll send him. Free of charge. It's the least they can do." After the marshal and his men left, Lila sat staring at the letter while Colt read over her shoulder. "We don't need his money," Colt said quietly. "No," she agreed. "But we'll take it. For the baby. For security. And because refusing would hurt Thomas. And he's trying to make amends in his own way. You've forgiven them all, haven't you? The town, your brother, everyone who failed you." She considered this, one hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "Holding on to anger takes energy I'd rather spend on love, on building our life, on raising our child to be better than those who came before." Christmas passed quietly, marked by small gifts and Lila's attempted recreation of the apple pie that had marked their first Christmas together. She was mixing the dough when the first pain hit, sharp and unexpected, making her gasp and grip the table. "Lila!" Colt was beside her instantly. "I'm fine," she breathed. But then another pain came. Stronger. Oh, I think, but it's too early. 3 weeks too early." His face went white. "The doctor, there's no time. The snow's too deep. We're doing this ourselves." She gripped his hand as another wave hit. Just like the mountain women before me. What followed were the longest hours of Colt's life. He would tell her later. He who had delivered calves and foals, who had seen death and birth in equal measure, was reduced to near panic by his wife's labor. But Lila found strength she didn't know she possessed. Some ancient knowledge rising up from generations of women who'd done this very thing. As dawn broke on the new year of 1884, the cabin filled with the most beautiful sound either had ever heard. The strong, healthy cry of their daughter. "A girl," Colt breathed, cradling the tiny bundle with infinite care, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Perfect and whole and alive. What should we call her?" Lila asked, exhausted but euphoric. Colt looked down at their daughter, then at his wife, and smiled through his tears. "Hope. We'll call her Hope, because that's what she is." As Lila took their daughter to her breast for the first time, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, from the depths of despair in a saloon to this moment of perfect joy in their mountain home. Every choice, every heartbreak, every moment of courage had led to this. "I love you," she told Colt, who was watching them both with wonder. "Thank you for saving me that night." "You saved yourself," he corrected softly. "I just gave you a place to heal. We saved each other." Outside, the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Inside, a family that had been forged from loss and tempered by love faced their future together. The girl who had been willing to sacrifice everything for love had found more than she ever dreamed possible. A home, a husband who cherished her, and now a daughter who would grow up knowing she was loved, wanted, and valuable beyond measure. In the years to come, they would return to Silver Creek occasionally, to bank Thomas's gift, to buy supplies, to show young Hope the place where her parents' story began. The town would continue its slow journey toward accepting responsibility for its failures, and some wounds would heal while others remained as scars. But here in their mountain sanctuary, with snow falling soft outside and their daughter's contented sounds filling the cabin, Lila Mae Brennan knew she had found what she'd been searching for all along. Not just love, but redemption. Not just survival, but a life worth living. Not just a second chance, but a future bright with promise. And that, she thought as she drifted toward sleep with her family around her, was the greatest gift of all. Thank you so much for listening to this tale of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West. If you're enjoying these stories around our Wild West campfire, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel for more stories of courage, romance, and adventure from America's frontier days. What did you think of Lila and Colt's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and love hearing how these tales touch your hearts. Until next time, partners, keep those campfires burning bright.